I'm getting whammied from all sides already, and I'm ready to take it. I'm going into the ring. And speaking of which, let's go into the ring right now with some updates on international organizations in the world. We won't cover them all today because I'm already like in minute 11. So I'm going to talk about the ones that you've mostly heard about, mostly the economic institutions, the economic-based international organizations and how they've changed. Now, you may not have gotten to this yet, and I apologize to all the folks that are not in my World Regions class, but the folks who are have a bit more background on what I'm getting ready to talk about. And even if you're in my class, you likely have not gotten through all the book quizzes yet. There's no reason for you to have. But what you're going to find is that there's a whole chapter, I want to say it's chapter 24. There's a whole chapter on the very thing I'm going to introduce you to right now. Every edition of the Plaid Avengers World, I write a brand new chapter about the cover story. So I pick a new global theme. And a couple of years ago when I started the 10th edition, I thought the most important global theme was the battle of nationalism versus internationalism. And by golly, I was on point. Still am today. And so the cover of each book is about a certain global theme I think is of importance that year. And then there's a chapter in the book that talks about why I think that's an important theme. So if you've not gotten to it yet, chapter 24, maybe it's chapter 25, is all about the stuff I'm getting ready to talk about right now. And here we go. So when we're talking about how much change has occurred in international organizations and attitudes towards international organizations, just in the last 5 years, what you have is an ideological throwdown that's happening. So in the larger context, there have been more and more moves by more and more countries or sovereign states. More and more sovereign states have been moving more and more to the right side of the political spectrum. We can point out some obvious ones. The United States of America in the Trump years was certainly further right on the political spectrum in terms of attitudes and especially attitudes towards the rest of the globe than previous administrations, and one could argue since any administration of the United States. By the way, I'm not political. I don't say these things because I'm making fun of the Trump administration. I just want you to understand the world. The United States was not alone, though. It wasn't the only one that got more conservative and started to retract from the global stage to become more focused on America first and not the rest of the world. The U.S. wasn't alone. Other countries like Poland and Hungary over in Europe had been going that direction for a while. There's right-leaning, if not extreme right-leaning political movements in virtually all countries of Europe. But only certain countries have already completely embraced that and taken it to the highest levels of their domestic offices. Poland and Hungary are the best examples of that. The United States is a good example of that. Brazil is a very good example of that. A very right-leaning or almost right-wing president of Brazil right now with Jair Bolsonaro. So this is a global trend. It's not just Trump. It's not just even the United States. This has been a global trend that's been unrolling, one could argue, for a decade, but certainly gathered a tremendous amount of steam in the last 5 years since the rise of Donald Trump in America, because he was the first and foremost to outright on the global stage said America first. We're going to focus on our country first, and we don't particularly care to be part of these other global institutions or international trade groups or fill in the blank defense organizations like NATO. And again, I'm trying to start with the larger context. What's the ideological battle is that many politicians the world over and many citizens of countries the world over are leaning back towards the concept of wanting the nation state to trump internationalism. They want the idea of this sovereign state as the ultimate political entity that controls everything about the lives of the citizens within that state. This group of folks wants the buck to stop there, if that makes sense. So this group of folks is anti-globalization, anti-international organization, and that group has been growing. And again, it's been growing all across the world in many countries. By the way, I should say, that's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is what's been happening for the last 50 to 60 years since World War II, which is a internationalization of entities, of countries working together economically or for defense pacts like NATO or the Warsaw Pact, of countries getting together in global bodies like the United Nations to try to solve problems and present legislation that all states will abide by. So that's the international globalism path. And the opposite direction, going back towards the right, is a more conservative, center-right to extreme right path of our country first and foremost, and we don't want to go over into the internationalization side. Now, there's a whole variety of reasons why this is occurring, and they're in that chapter of the book that I want you to read eventually. If you're that fascinated, you can jump ahead right now and read all about it in a plethora of detail. It's got a lot to do with job movement, with the disruption of technology to people's jobs, with immigration that's threatening people's perhaps identity, threatening perhaps people's idea of their culture, threatening their job prospects. There's a variety of reasons that are packed into why there's this movement right. Now I'm going to bring it home to get to the lecture today. In total, you have this move to the right that the United States, Poland, Hungary, Brazil, many others are moving towards. They're joining countries like Russia and China, which have firmly been in the China first, Russia first category for pretty much ever. So, and a lot of the angst that's occurring in more pro-democracy, Western, open, internationalized countries is that they look at places like Russia and China especially, and saying, China's really successful right now. China's killing it right now. China's people are getting rich right now. And they're all about China first and not caring about the rest of the world. We should be doing that. So you can make logical arguments on both sides of this ideological showdown. I just want to make you aware of that's the context of which I need to update these international organizations. Because at the end of the day, especially in the last 5 years, at the end of the day, what you have is club memberships have been on the decline. Worldwide, at least the attitude and support of club memberships has been going down. More countries are retracting from that globalism perspective, retracting a full-fledged kind of dedication to a global movement or even just an international body or an international club based on trade that they're a member of. There is a movement away from that and towards America first, China first, Brazil first. That is away from globalization, away from internationalization, and towards nation state or sovereign state entities as being the beat-all, end-all political unit that we should all abide by and not worry about the rest. Does that make sense? So how does that attitude, the rise of Donald Trump in America, of Bolsonaro in Brazil, of the continued dominance of Xi in China and Putin in Russia, how has that played into international organizations? I'll tell you, friends. Here we go. So I pointed out a whole slew of them, and it was not an exhaustive list, and I gave you little mini lectures on each one. So I'm going to now do some rapid-fire updates of specific ones that have been most significantly impacted. I'm sorry, you have a question? Oh, should I check, before I get to that, should I check the chat room? Let's see. Do I see? I don't see that one. Yeah, read it out to me.
Old Timey says, do you foresee additional countries retracting from the EU?
Do I see additional countries retracting or pulling out of the EU in particular? No, I do not. Not in the current state of affairs. We never can tell what's going to happen 5 years from now, because if you'd asked me 5 years ago if Great Britain would pull out of the EU, I would have said that's nonsense. That will never happen. So even the best assessments with the greatest amount of research and thought going into them can't account for time and things just changing. But as of this podcast, no, I have not heard anything to suggest that any other countries might pull out of the European Union. If we had to project ones that might 5 years from now, ones I've named would be the ones: Poland, Hungary, a couple other Eastern European additions to the EU that are starting to chafe under the EU's leadership that's very much more on the liberal side than conservative side when it comes to things like human rights and democracy and legal rights of every citizen within the EU. So there's been a big push by the more liberal countries in the EU to clamp down on the more authoritarian tendencies of Poland and Hungary right this second, and that's causing frictions. So if I had to project, and that feels like a test question for anybody trying quiz questions, if I had to project ahead to what countries might, and this is just a might, pull out of the EU, it would be those increasingly authoritarian-leaning countries like Hungary and Poland that are chafing under the EU push for liberal democracy. Okay. Let's see. There's any other comments I need? I see there's a lot of comments flying, so just flag me if...
Yeah, so it's King Africa.
King Africa.
Do you see the EU allowing Turkey in? Someone else already commented, but you can have your comment.
King Africa 420 says, do you see the EU allowing Turkey in? No. And by the way, King Africa, Turkey doesn't want in anymore. I would suggest that the EU's turbulence because of the Brexit and its current internal issues with Hungary are stymieing any further growth for the time being. The EU right now wants to get its house in order to get past fully the Brexit and all the economic turbulence that that's still causing, and to get its house back in order, probably fine-tune a lot of things, get everybody back to being happy, at least get all the countries back on the same page, before they would even consider any further growth. And Turkey and the EU have been in negotiations for 50 years about the EU thing, and it's been going south for the last 10 years. I can't imagine that getting any traction in the modern era. Again, mostly King Africa, because Turkey is increasingly not interested in getting in the EU. They go back and forth, but by and large, the president, Erdogan, has openly dismissed it recently, saying, I don't know, we're better than the EU. We're growing faster than them anyway. But you never know. Again, times change. I'm going to get to the EU, by the way, and if you have specific questions about entities, wait till I get to that entity. I'm going to start with some ones that you probably have never heard of because they're already gone. So I'm going to start with one called the TPP, an update to the Trans-Pacific Partnership that when I made the video about years ago, I was wildly excited about it. By the way, when I get excited about things, it's not because I think personally they're great. I get excited because I see things moving and changing the dynamic of what's happening within the regions. So I was excited about the TPP, and by all accounts, it was moving forward and kind of was almost done. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership, for those that are completely out of the loop, and there's no reason you should be in the loop because it's not been brought up for 4 years, was a proposed trade agreement between the major economies of the Pacific Rim, excluding China, by the way. I'll come back to that in a second. So Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, Vietnam, and the United States of America were all going to get into cahoots in a free trade area. That was going to be the basis of it. But that also shared all sorts of rules, like rules on internet privacy, rules on patent infringement, rules on copyrights, rules on a variety of telecommunications things. And what trade blocs do well is mostly trade, lower tariffs, everybody trades more with each other. That's the basis of it. But when you start adding on all these other elements, it actually can strengthen a trade bloc because everybody's playing by the same rules for a variety of things that are important to all those economies. Overall, it encourages more and more trade, more and more selling of stuff to more and more countries. The United States was the one that invented it. There's no bones about it. The United States had invented this project perhaps a decade ago and made it not just because they wanted to get more trade. They created it also as a geopolitical tool to counter the growth of a rising China. Now, I don't know if I put that into that podcast, but for those of you making quiz questions right now, the TPP's, I think, main goal from the United States perspective was as a geopolitical leverage point to contain a growing influence of China in the Pacific. The reason why I bring that up specifically, and you can make another test question out of it, is because I want you to understand and know that. Because when Donald Trump came to office, elected in 2016, took office in 2017, his first act in office was to delete the TPP. It was at the signatory point. All the countries are ready to sign on the dotted line. There were only final considerations of particular trade issues like the price of rice between the USA and Japan, let's say. So they were at the point of ironing out the final details when Donald Trump came to office, and immediately, and I believe it might have actually been his first act in office in January, was to say, we're pulling out of the TPP. It sucks. It's terrible. It's the worst thing I've ever seen. I'm paraphrasing, but it's Donald Trump. You can just paraphrase him all you want. It still sounds better than most of the things he said. So the United States rescinded itself out of the TPP, an entity it had created, and thus began this whole chapter of the last 4 to 5 years of the retraction away, physical retraction away from international institutes by many member states around, or sovereign states around the world. That wasn't the last one that Donald Trump did, but it was the very first one. So why did I specifically point out that the United States may have created the TPP to counter the rise of influence of China? Well, because Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, in the 4 years he was in office, during the 4 years in his office, made it a point to try to counter the rise of the influence of China. He started trade wars with China. He increased the price of goods and services between the United States and China. The U.S. farmers have been particularly hit hard by lowering exports, decreasing exports to China because of this trade war. The Trump administration did several military things to counter China. So the irony of this is that the TPP, which he pulled out of immediately, was its main mission was to do the very thing he tried to do for 4 years. Does that make sense? Again, I don't care about being political. I'm not attacking them, the Trump administration, because I'm a liberal. I want you to understand what's going on here and why it's so important to the future, because is Joe Biden now going to rejoin the TPP because the Biden administration wants to keep the pressure on China that the Trump administration started? They have outright said that. So we could see the United States maybe moving back in this direction. And not only is it ironic that the Trump administration pulled out of the TPP immediately and then had a 4-year campaign to kind of counter China's influence, but by the United States pulling out of the TPP, it may have actually driven other countries closer to China who are counting on the United States to be the anchor of the TPP. China's already had discussions of, hey, we should join the TPP. We have Pacific frontage. We should be in this club. So you see why I keep saying this is kind of ironic. You've got the opposite effect of what the United States probably created this whole entity for. And let me update you on the rest of this. Even though Donald Trump pulled out of the TPP, the rest of the country said, well, okay, and they went forward with it anyway. So the TPP got passed by all the other member states besides the United States and went into force in December of 2018. So call that 2019. You're still only looking about this thing's only about 2 years old. The reason why it's becoming more critical, because the Biden's administration may rejoin it, is that China has also used the absence of the United States to put pressure on the other TPP members in the United States' absence. And feels like a quiz question coming up. One need only look to a current trade war between China and Australia. Just a couple months ago, China slapped a 200% tariff on Australian wine. And a slew of other Australian products also got slapped with tariffs, not quite as high as that, but coal and steel and a variety of other things that China buys a lot of from Australia have now increased in tariffs. And this is due partly, and this is a bit of an assessment, this is a hypothesis, you can't quote this as fact, but why is China suddenly attacking Russia? I'm sorry, China attacking Australia, trade-wise? It likely has something to do with the TPP, that China is pushing these other countries saying, hey, you guys, you hooked up, you saddled up your horse to this TPP led by the United States, and they ain't here no more to protect you. So we can do this to get a better trade arrangement. We can start a trade war with you. So it's partly TPP based, but it's also because Australia has increasingly called for or supported a probe into the COVID, the rise of COVID in China, which China did not want anybody to support, an international look-see into what happened with COVID. And Australia also is a big promoter of human rights, and so they've come out on record several times decrying China's human rights abuses against the Uyghurs and other folks. So you are in this position where Australia is now more isolated because the TPP is not strong enough to help absorb the shock from the losses that the Australians are taking to China just on trade. So Australia is in a position of having to lose its political voice because it's by itself instead of being a part of a stronger entity, which is why international organizations typically form up to give a lot of small voices one bigger voice. Now, to finish with a TPP update, I suggested the Biden administration may be thinking about rejoining, but they've not been very vocal about it yet. Well, I think the agriculture minister in the Biden administration wants to join and has talked about it publicly, but the top man himself has not, and they're holding their cards close to their chest on whether they're going to rejoin the group. It seems like to me, I'll make a guess that they will rejoin TPP within 2 years because, again, it will be a counter to the power of China in trade in this area. Counter China's power in trade and also geopolitical influence. So I look for the Biden administration to rejoin. But here's another test question and the most hilarious part of this update. Take a wild stab who just 3 weeks ago applied to be a part of the TPP. Think critically about this. And I'll give you a hint. It's not a country that actually has frontage on the Pacific Ocean. They're not in the Pacific Ocean. And a country said, we would like to be part of the TPP. Let me give you some more hints. Someone says India. No, not in the last month anyway. India is being courted to perhaps join the TPP, but I've not heard that they asked to join. There you go. Big Vash says the United Kingdom, so does King Africa 420. The United Kingdom just submitted an application to join the TPP. Now, why might that be? Why might that be? Oh, maybe because you Brexited and you just lost a serious trade relationship with Europe, and now you're looking around the rest of the world to figure out how you can make up for that. Interesting how when you know what's going on in the world, you see these natural ties that are occurring. So the United States and the United Kingdom is the United States' hugest, bestest buddy and ally. The United States pulls out of this TPP and the UK wants to go around the other side of the planet and join it. All right, well, that's your TPP update. Oh, I like that. Someone said, Aston 7 says trade block shopping. I like it. Oh, I'm sorry. Any TPP questions? Rapid fire before I go on to the next one. Big Vash says, is Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison an example of a right-wing leader like Trump, or is he just a regular conservative? He's just a regular conservative, Big Vash. And the funny thing is if you know Australian politics, the center-right people in Australian politics would be liberal in the United States. So if you took if Joe Biden were an Australian, he would be conservative in Australia. The whole political spectrum in Australia, you just pick the whole thing up and just move it a little bit to the left and drop it back down again. Let's see. Look at UK have any territories in the Pacific to justify joining? Gosh, that's a good question. The UK, most of the UK holdings in terms of small territories are in the Atlantic, some in the Indian. I don't know the answer to that. You got to figure they got something over there. Pitcairn Islands? Is the Pitcairns in the Pacific? That's close. It's definitely close. MJ Odd says, do you see the United Nations becoming more of a global trading forum in the near future? This isn't TPP, but we just did the UN. No, the UN is staunchly not trade. Staunchly not trade. The UN pretty much covers everything but trade. So if you look at the overall structure of the lecture series you've been watching, there are economic blocks that focus almost overwhelmingly on trade. There are defensive blocks that focus only on military. And then there's everything else. And the United Nations is in the everything else category. Let's get countries together to hash out all the other problems, but not with trade, because not only do you have individual international trade blocks based just on trade. ASEAN is a trade bloc. The EU is a trade bloc. NAFTA is a trade bloc. You have those entities, but you also have the WTO, which is a global entity that helps broker disputes between countries and trade blocs. So trade has its own whole superstructure. The United Nations does not deal with that stuff at all.
Who asked about Biden?
About Biden. Biden would be considered, okay.
No, will Biden rejoin the TPP?
Well, I just talked about that. I think, I think Biden will. My prediction is that the United States under Biden will rejoin the TPP within a couple years. They're going to float some options first. They probably don't want to confront China too much more openly right this second. And they're going to use, this is just a hypothesis, they're going to use rejoining the TPP to put leverage on China in some future dispute that we don't even know about yet. If China says, we're going to do this, then the United States is like, okay, we're going to rejoin the TPP and become a much bigger presence over in the Pacific. So I think it's being used as a leverage card right now, and the Biden administration's going to feel out when they're going to pull that trigger. Let's see. Yeah, Dekas has pointed out it's snowing in Blacksburg right now. Let me now get to the next trade block update. And this is one that's more closer to home. Well, actually, the TPP was closer to home before the United States pulled out. And that is NAFTA. So NAFTA was the North American Free Trade Agreement. Started back in 1994. Sorry, I just dropped my glasses. Beverage break. Got to keep the whistle wetted. So NAFTA started in 1994. It's been hugely successful by any economist measure. Created much more wealth, much more trade, much more business between the three member countries, the United States, Canada, and Mexico. But Donald Trump didn't like that one either. So the update on NAFTA is it's still kind of here, but now it's called a different name. When Donald Trump was running for office of president, he decried NAFTA nonstop, saying stole jobs, stole jobs, stole jobs, took all our jobs, took all our jobs. And that plays to the American population. Hell, it plays to people pretty much worldwide. If you say other countries are taking our jobs, people get their panties in a bunch about it. So when he got into office, he said immediately, we're going to scrap it. Just like we scrapped the TPP. Get rid of it. And then enough businesses and enough other people were like, dude, people have made tons of money off this. Our economies are intertwined. You can't kill it. Okay, we're going to rework it. So what happened in the last 5 years with NAFTA is that they did rework it. And you know what? Whether you love the Trump administration or hate the Trump administration, it probably wasn't a bad thing. Even now, the other countries of Canada and Mexico have said, it wasn't a bad thing to dust that off. We had not looked at it since 1994 when it was created, and that's now 25 years ago. Well, it would have been 20 years ago when Donald Trump came into office. So it was a 20-year-old charter that really had not been adjusted at all. Has the world changed? And from 1994 to 2016, had the world changed at all? Just think about technology and telecommunications. That alone justified dusting this agreement back off and looking at what's going on. So it wasn't so much that jobs, we're losing jobs. It was a host of other things that probably it made sense to dust this thing back off. So the treaty was semi-outdated, unsuited to the modern economy, especially technology and the internet. But it just, because of inertia, it's already here. People just kept playing by the rules. It was time by 2016, 2017. The threats that Donald Trump made of just destroying it really galvanized all the players involved, though. So that was kind of a good thing, too. If Donald Trump had said, we should look at this, the other countries and players would have said, okay, we'll look at it at some point. But you remember 4 years of Donald Trump. He would walk in saying, we're going to destroy it. We don't need it. We're going to burn it to the ground. And actually, that got people up and got their attention. Like, okay, we need, it's going to get killed unless we dust this thing off. And dust off they did. And because Donald Trump likes to put his brand stamp on everything, he mostly was pushing for it just to be renamed, as far as I can tell. So now it's actually NAFTA still in existence, but it's called 3 different things in all 3 different countries. In the United States, we now refer to it as the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement. USMCA. Wow, how original is that? Okay. And it was completely ratified and is locked down since March 2020. So just 6-8 months ago. What changed? Honestly, I don't see a whole lot of changes besides the revamping. And they, went back and forth over particular things like we're going to ban Canadian dairy or tax it or Canadian logs. Every business entity had certain things they wanted out of it. And some of them got some of those things. But, you step back from the whole thing, it's like it didn't really change that much for trade. However, it did a whole lot to promote digital commerce much more. Again, digital commerce didn't exist in 1994. I mean, it did, but it's nothing like what you guys are used to in the modern era. We barely had internet in 1994. You had computers that kind of talked to each other in a laboratory setting. So think of Amazon and everything you buy and everything you purchase and everything you get delivered. That didn't exist in 1994. So promoting digital commerce feels like a quiz question. That was kind of a big one that this new dusting off of NAFTA did tackle. It also implemented a whole slew of new regulations with financial services. It actually made it easier for financial services to move and do business across these borders in between these countries. It encouraged competitiveness of telecommunications across the board. Again, telecommunications in 2016 virtually unrelated to telecommunications in 1994. One of the things, another test question is, they changed NAFTA for dispute settlement. So when the United States got mad at Canada or Canada got mad at Mexico in the past, all 3 countries had to sit down and hash it out. So it was a trilateral meeting over anything. They changed that to be bilateral. So now when the United States has a problem with Canadian dairy, just those 2 countries sit down and hash it out. Mexico does not need to be at the table. And the same as if Mexico has a problem with the United States, just those 2 countries. So move from trilateral to bilateral, streamlining things, as it were, for dispute settlement. They did a whole lot of other things to protect intellectual property, because that has also changed a lot in the modern world. Just think about, like, who owns your TikTok video? Do you think you own it? I don't know. Do you? Do you own something you post on Facebook? I don't know. Do you? I'm asking. These are new issues. So intellectual property, everything from patents and copyrights to artistic works, had to be dealt with and were dealt with in this new NAFTA. And lastly, the last thing I'm going to point out is more stringent rules for origins of goods. Origins of goods. What does that mean? Particularly with the automotive sector, particularly when it came to car building. The United States, well, I shouldn't say the United States. Certain folks in the United States, like Donald Trump and maybe some other businesses, have long said, dudes, that's not fair to not put a tariff on cars made in Mexico. If they're only assembling parts from around the world and putting them into a single car and then selling them to us, is that a Mexican car that shouldn't be taxed? Because the reality is, with cars or any complicated machinery, you're getting parts from China. You may get the fan belts from Indonesia and some rotors from China and the brakes from South Africa. And so is it right for you to just get all these parts from around the world, but by putting them together across the border in Mexico makes it a Mexican product that doesn't have to have tariffs? Not so fast. So that's what origins of goods is all about. You can't just bring something into Canada or the United States or Mexico and claim that, well, now it's here so we can sell it without a tariff to the next door neighbor. That makes sense? So they dealt with a lot of that stuff too. Okay? Big Bash says, why are you dissenting against your corporate overlords? And Mohammed says Amazon owns us all. All hell Jeff Bezos says I can't read it. Nigerian prince. It's a Nigerian prince. Another hilarious screen name. Let's see. I also got some comments here. Dom H313 says, I'd be suspicious if England said they own anything made of wood. There you go. They have to import all their wood. So is that an English product at some point that would go untariffed into the EU? Well, I guess it would now, or they'd get tariffed now because they're not part of the EU. MJA Odd says, after watching the CEC hearing on GME, I definitely don't think our current political leaders are set to handle any sort of legislative changes regarding new technology, especially given that encryption was nearly abolished without a good understanding. There you go. Even things like GME. Actually, I'd say stuff like GMO. GMO didn't exist 20 years ago. So you have to dust off these entities every now and again and say, hey, we have to account for new things that weren't here when we initially built our charter. Crazy Brazy Lazy says, got the new Amazon Prime 3.4 brain implant yesterday. Awesome. That means you can become a free subscriber thanks to Prime. Okay, but unless you have other questions about the newly established USMCA, which, by the way, is 95% NAFTA with some updates. And again, to display my equality of not paying attention to either political party in the United States, I will say not a bad implementation during the Trump administration. To get rid of it would have been terrible. To modify it, not that bad. Now let's go to another one that has gotten a lot bad. And that would be Mercosur. Mercosur down in South America, the premier trade bloc of that continent, has been in a slump. When I originally did that recording probably 7 years ago, Mercosur and another one that's in conjunction, which I'm going to go ahead and name right now, USAN or UNASUR. You guys watch videos on both of these, right? Mercosur and UNASUR. 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, UNASUR was growing rapidly. For those of you that are not in my class, UNASUR is basically a NAFTA, actually it's more like a EU of South America. They were really going for full trade integration as well as working towards freedom of movement of people and some sort of political rule creating body that all South American entities would sign up for. And it was moving fast, and countries were joining the UNASUR movement. UNASUR was going to supplant Mercosur. That's where it looked like it was going. Mercosur is 99% trade based between kind of the big southern states of Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay. I believe Chile was an associate member. But then all the other countries of South America were associate members of Mercosur. It looked like it was the future. 10 years ago, it really looked like the future. 6 or 7 years ago, it was gaining steam. And it has just fallen flat in the last 4 years. Again, partly because of the ideological battle happening on the planet of going away from internationalization and more towards nation-state, sovereign stateism. Partly that, but we also now have to talk about COVID. COVID has damaged international trade across the board. So if you just look at, COVID has compounded the hit that internationalization and these international trade groups have encountered in the last 4 to 5 years. It's really been kind of the icing on the shit cake of internationalization of the last 5 years, or move away from it. So Mercosur has been in a overall slump that goes along with the COVID slump, the world economic slump, the move away from international bodies. And I won't say it's defunct, but Mercosur has been quite static. And add to this is part of the now update of why Mercosur is kind of in a slump, is the chaos created by Venezuela. So Venezuela 5 years ago had become the most recent inductee to become a full-fledged Mercosur state. And then Venezuela has just been in a downward spiral ever since. By all accounts, Venezuela is a dictatorship. which is anti-free trade. It's anti-democracy. It's anti pretty much everything that Mercosur's charter says it is. So what you had is, and this is following the Nicolas Maduro takeover from Hugo Chavez's death, and then a couple of fairly flawed elections, which no one on planet Earth thinks were fair at all, that strengthened Maduro's hold on the entire economy, as well as the economy tanking because of the horrific policies of both Maduro and Chavez before him. So had nothing happened, had none of this happened, and not COVID and not moved away from globalization, Venezuela would still be in deep economic trouble right now and be in deep political trouble. And because of these moves, Mercosur countries started to distance themselves from Venezuela and kick them out. They've been on suspended hiatus, I think 4 years ago. I might have the fact here in just a little bit. But Venezuela's been kicked out, and this has caused consternation within the group.
You had a couple new subscribers.
A couple new subscribers. Thank you, new subscribers. Sarin, the Dark Lord, Sarin has subscribed. And a Nigerian Prince has subscribed. Thank you. It's Nigerian Prince. Such great screen names all around. So back to Mercosur. The EU 5 years ago was brokering a trade agreement between Mercosur bloc and the EU bloc. Portugal, which now has the presidency of the EU, has been working towards establishing more transatlantic trade ties between the two blocs. But it just, because of all these factors and many more I'm sure I'm missing, it's not been going anywhere. And in fact, France just several weeks ago said they refused to sign the current, pact. There's a current agreement in the works to lower tariffs between the EU and Mercosur, and France basically vetoed it just last month. Or actually, no, this month. Just in February, vetoed it, said, nope, it's not right. We have too many of our citizens that are not happy about this. And they weren't alone. A lot of folks in Ireland and other ag-producing countries. France produces a lot of agricultural product, namely wine and cheese. The Irish produce a lot of grain. The Germans produce a lot of grain. Ukraine produces a lot of grain. The Irish also produce beef. And so there were particular agricultural items that were going to piss off a lot of Europeans if they were allowed to be imported from Mercosur countries way cheaper, namely grain and beef. So you take the kind of, fights over commodities and then add in this layer that Mercosur's kind of been in a funk, and that's why they said, "No, we're not ready to sign any trade agreements right now." So Mercosur has actually taken a step back. It's not defunct, but it's just hanging out. The Mercosur leaders are getting together soon, I think, to try to figure out how to get that going again. But Mercosur's down, but not out, and that leads me to the update for the next trade bloc. Economic union that is now gone, that is completely defunct and destroyed since I podcasted about it 4 years ago. This is all in 4 years, and that is the USON/UNASUR, and that is 12 South American countries that were getting together to form a continent-wide trade and political and social bloc that was going to be something closer to the European Union than, say, a NAFTA. They had high aspirations of bonding the countries of the continent together. Many people over the centuries have actually had this dream of South America forming up a club to promote its own interest and its interest of its member countries, as opposed to all being individuals that export and have relationships individually with everybody else. That has been a long dream since Simon Bolivar led revolutions in the 1800s, all the way up to the Cuban Revolution and the Venezuelan Revolution, that were also proponents of this idea of a country or a continent-wide bloc. And to re-stress, it looked like it was going places 6 years ago. Almost all countries. I mean, 12 countries of South America. Somebody go do the math for me. I think there are only 12 countries in South America. So I think everyone had signed up for this. The last meeting they had, like 2014 or 2015, they established they were going to build a headquarters for it in Quito, Ecuador. They had funds going into it. They were going to start drafting laws, and then it just died. And it died a rapid death. So what happened? I was excited when I talked about this block 5 years ago, and now it's gone. So, yes, the chap dad, I'm talking about USAN, USAN. It's also called UNASUR, UNASUR. Depends on if you're talking Spanish or Portuguese. And why it died, for a variety of reasons. We'll start with this one. I already started talking about Venezuela. And so back in 2015, I want to say, in 2015 or 2016, Venezuela became so bad economically and politically, and mostly started repressing human rights and were having fake elections, that the other UNASUR countries started to say, hey, we're pro-market, pro-democratic states, and that's part of our charter. Same with Mercosur. So we don't like what's going on in Venezuela. We can't have them as a member. So Mercosur suspended Venezuela outright, said you're not part of the club anymore until you straighten up your act. UNASUR had the opposite effect. Countries started quitting UNASUR in protest of Venezuela because they didn't like Chavez. They didn't like Nicolas Maduro, who is now in charge. And there was a Bolivia link, meaning as countries like the big ones, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia actually started this trend, started to repudiate the government of Venezuela, saying Nicolas Maduro and his crew are anti-democratic. This isn't a free state anymore. We cannot have them in our club anymore. And Colombia said, we're tapping out of UNASUR in protest because you have Venezuela as a member, and that's not cool. When that happened, other countries also expressed that, hey, we're going to kick Venezuela out of our club. Bolivia's president, Evo Morales, at the time, urged UNASUR to actually defend Venezuela. Now, let me stop the cart there. For those of you that are not clue about leftist versus extreme leftist politics across Latin America, you can look at several countries as fairly far to the left of the political spectrum. In terms of communism is not the right word, but socialism, open embracers of socialism in the economic and political spectrums. And those countries would be Cuba. Obviously, it's still supposedly communist. Cuba and Bolivia. They're the big ones. Some in Central America, too, like Nicaragua. But when... and Venezuela, Venezuela and Bolivia and Cuba and Nicaragua are fairly left-leaning places. Pro-socialism, anti-U.S., by the way. I won't say anti-free trade or anti-capitalist, but they're reserved on that front. So when the bigger economy countries started to distance themselves from Venezuela, Bolivia, also leftist countries, stood up for Venezuela, saying, hey, dudes, come on. We're trying to make this distinctly Latin American thing, and you shouldn't pick on Venezuela. We need to unify. And Bolivia then tumbled into political turmoil, not at that moment, but within a year, that saw Evo Morales get ejected out of the presidency. And some call it a coup, some call it a revolution. Bolivia is not in great shape either. But what you then had is a series of dominoes that started to fall. Because when Morales came out and said we should keep Venezuela in the club and we should become more leftist ourselves, all of us, Morales actually ascended to the presidency of UNASUR. It was completely unrelated. It had already been set up years in advance. So when leftist Evo Morales became head of UNASUR, then a whole bunch of countries said, we're out. We don't like Venezuela, and we don't like Bolivia that much, and now they're in charge, and this guy's going to defend Venezuela? We're out. So on April 20th of 2018, 6 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Paraguay, and Peru announced that they are suspending their own membership out of UNISAR. They said this entity is not even what we put it together for. We're out. In March of 2019, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro tapped out. In March of 2020, within the same month, Uruguay tapped out. So you have this bizarre situation that because of internal turmoil, political turmoil in Venezuela that translated into some in Bolivia, and then the worldwide movement away from international organizations, and then a worldwide recession because of a pandemic, everything starts stacking up and countries start fleeing from the UNISAR concept altogether. So as of right now, there is no USAN/UNISAR. It doesn't exist. All of the members have pulled out. I mean, maybe Bolivia and Venezuela are still members, but it doesn't matter because it's gone. However, wait for it. Something's already cropped up in its place. And I don't know if this is ironic or just bizarre. However, PROSUR is the new acronym you need to know. Somebody type this into the chat room. PROSUR. PROSUR. PROSUR is the new UNISAR. And PROSUR stands for the Forum for the Progress, the Progress and Development of South America. That's the new acronym and the new entity. And here's how it kind of got rolled out. When I already gave you some dates here. In April of 2019, when Argentina pulled out of UNISAR, it created PROSUR. And then in March of 2019, Ecuador pulled out of UNISAR and joined PROSUR. And in March of 2020, Brazilian President Bolsonaro of Brazil pulled out of UNISAR and joined PROSUR. So at this point, the whole thing's kind of flipped. I want to say there's at least 8 countries in it, maybe more. And now I'll just pull out some quotes that I found. The Colombian president, by the way, Colombia led the charge on this because Colombia and Venezuela really don't like each other. So from the start, Colombia was peeved that Venezuela even got into Mercosur, much less UNISAR. And they've off and on again been fighting almost a border war. And so Colombia was the first that said, nope, if Venezuela is still in UNISAR, we're out. And we're going to form this other thing called PROSUR. And in the words of Colombian president, who made the announcement for PROSUR in January of 2019, again, that's basically just a year ago, right? Is that 2 years now? Yes, January 2020. So just 2 years ago, the Colombian president said this is a South American coordination mechanism for public policies in defense of democracy to instill independence of powers, the market economy, the social agenda with sustainability due on application. The key words there are defense of democracy and market economy. So PROSUR is definitely, and this has been characterized as this by multiple news organizations and people that study these things, you can look at PROSUR as a center-right to right-wing response to what was a much more left-wing liberal UNISAR. And again, do you see how now that plays into the bigger global theme that I've been talking about of a move generally in the world towards the right and away from the liberal left? This is how it's playing out in South America in acronyms that we can actually point to. So UNISAR, in 5 years, UNISAR is dead. A left-leaning UNISAR is dead, and a right-leaning PROSUR is established, and pretty much all the major players jump from one boat into the other for this new acronym. Isn't that fascinating stuff? Cool. The Chilean president, Sebastián Pinera, actually said just recently, this new forum will be open to all South American countries that meet 2 requirements: full validity of the rule of law and full respect for freedoms and human rights. So there you have the Colombian president and now the Chilean president who are asserting very openly why they're starting this new organization. It is undoubtedly to counter leftist influence of, say, Cuba, Venezuela, and Bolivia. It's almost openly countering that. And it is seemingly growing in popularity, not the least of which is because a lot more leaders of South American countries are now more conservative than they were just 5 years ago. The general trend, always think about the general trend of this continent or this country or the world of what's happening and how that relates to current events. Is that cool? Any questions about PROS or Mercosur, UNASUR before we move on? Oh, I got MJ Qels in the house saying, shout out from Baltimore. I had a killer Nero di Avola yesterday. For those of you not in the know, that's a wine. That's a red wine. It's a red grape from Sicily. Tastes like a $50, cost me $15. Bring it on, brother. Bring it on, MJ Cool. I'll taste some of that stuff. I love me some Nero di Avola. Okay, any comments, questions about, I see we're already over an hour. I told you it was not going to be short, but I'm nearing the end. The last one that I want to talk about, and again, feel free to ask questions about anything as we're going. The European Union. Holy frey-holies. Could one block have changed more in the last 5 years? Let's see. Ridlinman16 says, where do you see the Uyghur situation going? I see it going downhill for the Uyghurs, in a word, and I'm not being contrite about that. China's power has been growing significantly as every month and year passes. What China wants to do in its own territory, it will be doing. One only needs to look at what's going on in Hong Kong as China firmly slams its foot down on any democratic aspect of a system that it promised it would keep open and democratic till 2050, I think. So China is now powerful enough to not care about world opinion. I'm just speaking bluntly. And so while many people are saying, hey, we don't like what you're doing in China with the Uyghurs, China's government is of the opinion, So you don't like what we're doing in our country. We don't like what you're doing in your country. That's the end of that. So hopefully enough pressure will continue to be applied to China to modify its attitudes towards Uyghurs, but I wouldn't count on it. In fact, they may just double down and get worse to show how large and in charge they are and how they are not going to be intimidated by social or economic pressure from anyone. That's where China's at right now. Just my interpretation. Mohammed MV says, will the UN try to stop it? No. Remember, China is on the UN Permanent Security Council. The United Nations cannot, in the physical world in which we inhabit, the United Nations can do nothing to China because it would have to go through a resolution that China has veto power over. The United Nations simply can do nothing to China. Let's see. There you go. Nigerian Prince says, China's veto. Nigerian Prince knows what's up. So let me end on the European Union. And actually, while it's perhaps the biggest deal that's gotten the most news in the world, I'm going to spend the least amount of time on it because you've been beaten over the head with it so much. I'm only going to talk about a couple things that I find intriguing about to update about the European Union situation. I did do a Brexit podcast 4 years ago, which Katie is going to reactivate, and we'll reactivate the flash quiz for it. It's called it's a flash quiz Brexit, and the subtitle is the UK votes to not be great, and the TPP. So you can watch what I thought about it 4 years ago. And by and large, I've been pretty quiet about the whole Brexit situation since. And here's why. Because nobody knows what the hell's going on. So there wasn't anything to comment about. So ever since, just to catch you up, in 2016, the British people, Great Britain, oh, that's right, I'm not supposed to use accents. The British people voted to leave the European Union. And they said, okay, we're out. It's never been done before. No EU state has left. So there's no rule book. And so what you've had and I'm going to catch up really fast now, what you've had from 2016 until literally January 1st, a month and a half ago, is people trying to figure out what the hell's going to happen. And they've been going back and forth and trying to resolve all the trade issues and the tariff issues and this issue. And it's basically trying to get divorced. But try to imagine that you're married to 27 people and you have to get divorced from them. Oh, and you have children with all 27 too. 27 people you're married to, and you have joint children with all 27, and now you're getting divorced. That's what's been happening since 2016. And which is why there's been nothing to comment about, because they've been going back and forth about the settlement. And they only came to an agreement on paper, literally like Christmas Day last year. And it got implemented, signed, sealed, delivered on January 1st. So we're actually only in, what is today? February 20-something? We're only in like week 7 of the Brexit actually being implemented. So it's still too early to call. We don't really know how it's going to impact trade between the UK and the EU, which we all think is going to be a negative impact, which is why the UK is trying to join TPP and establish trade relations with China. Well, it already has trade relations, but beef up trade relations. So obviously trade's going to be impacted. We don't know how much or how little. Obviously, movement of people between the UK and the EU is now going to be challenged. We don't know how much or how little. A variety of things are going to be impacted, but we don't know how much or how little. Only time will tell, and the clock just started 7 weeks ago. So that's why I've not talked about it that much. However, there are some things that are definitely being impacted that I think you should know about, and that's why I'm giving you this update. I want you to know the NI protocol, just because it's cool. NI, the capital N, capital I protocol. Anybody got a clue what that stands for while I wet my whistle? NI, what would that stand for if it's coming from the UK breakup with the EU? NI protocol. Anyone? Okay, I'll give it to you. Someone says Henry VIII, but I'm missing the conversation on that. The NI protocol is Northern Ireland. There you go. Mr. Fox got it. I hope that's Guy Fawkes. The NI protocol is all about what to do with Northern Ireland. And sorry I don't have a graphic to pull up here for you, but just go Google map of United Kingdom. And you'll see, for those of you that don't understand the map of United Kingdom, the northern part of Ireland actually is part of the United Kingdom, not part of the sovereign state of Ireland. Got it? And there's a whole history behind that. And wars have been fought over that. In fact, internal wars, which just got settled within the last couple decades, over that border between Ireland and Northern Ireland and who's going to control Northern Ireland. So this is the trickiest part of Brexit, is that Northern Ireland is on the island of Ireland, and they had a peace agreement. I think it's called the Good Friday Accords. Go look it up. I know it's Good Friday something. I think it's the Good Friday Accords. That was a peace settlement to get people to stop fighting internally over who's going to control Northern Ireland. And part of the peace settlement was you would have open movement of people across the Northern Ireland border. It's part of a peace process. So when the UK comes along and says, we're going to get out of the European Union. Okay, wait a minute. Now you've got problems because Ireland is part of the European Union. And now you're saying Northern Ireland is not going to be part of the European Union. Okay, well, that means you need to regulate trade and all traffic, which means you need to put up border patrols and perhaps a wall and guards to check the movement of goods and services across that border. And that flies in the face of the peace agreement that opened up that border. So that's why Northern Ireland is so tricky and why they have something called the Northern Ireland Protocol, which I'm not going to go into all the details about because I don't know all the details. They're still trying to figure out all the details. But what basically it is that the border between the UK and Ireland that is the border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland, which is the rest of the island and is part of the EU, will become the only UK-EU land border. But people in Northern Ireland have the right to be Irish citizens as well as British citizens. So they're actually going to have to keep that border open and flowing, because those that exercise that right will retain their EU citizenship. Doesn't matter what side of that border they're on. So if you are a person in Northern Ireland who says, I'm living in a British territory and I perhaps am a British citizen, but I'm also an Irish citizen and therefore an EU citizen, and I can go back and forth all I want. They also are still trying to figure out, okay, well, what happens when a truckload of wine from France gets shipped to Ireland? Can the Irish just take that across the border to Northern Ireland? That's a different country that's not in the EU. So now you have a tariff that's going to have to be involved. So they're figuring out as calmly as they can how the transfer of goods and services across this very peculiar border is going to work while keeping the border open to the flow of EU/Northern Ireland/Irish citizens. That's what's tricky about that. And I have a feeling it's going to get trickier because it will fuel a debate within Northern Ireland to just get out of the United Kingdom altogether and join Ireland, which is what the civil wars there were all about for decades. So you may see, unless this goes completely smoothly, you might see violence start to creep in and independence movements start to creep into Northern Ireland once more. And the only other thing I wanted to add in this update about Brexit, because again, we really don't know how it's going to affect things on the ground. It's just now rolling out. But the other thing that it's certainly going to affect that I want you to know is Scotland. So for all the same reasons that Northern Ireland is a huge thorn in the ass of the UK's Brexit stuff, Scotland has had a pro-independence party that has been gaining members for decades. They had a referendum, that is a vote, to secede from the United Kingdom just like 6-7 years ago that was narrowly defeated. Okay, what's that got to do with Brexit? Oh, just this. The overwhelming majority of people in Scotland were pro-EU. The overwhelming majority of people in Scotland voted to stay in the EU. That is, they voted against Brexit. And now the overwhelming majority of people in Scotland have to be kicked out of the EU. And I can tell you, the overwhelming majority of these Scots ain't happy about it. So what you're already seeing unfold is the Scottish Prime Minister, Sturgeon is her name. I forget her first name. They have been saying ever since the Brexit vote in 2016, hey, this changes the game because we didn't want to get out of the EU and we didn't necessarily want to be part of the UK. And now you're adding fuel to the fire of another independence drive. And so the current Prime Minister is saying we are going to petition for another referendum on full independence. Most analysts suggest if that happens, the majority of Scots will vote for independence. So the United Kingdom has really, while the Brexit stuff is thorny and it's complicated and icky and messy about borders and taxes and tariffs and movement of people, these are much bigger issues which affect the country in a much bigger way. Get what I'm saying? So Northern Ireland and Scotland will continue to be problematic as the impacts of Brexit fully establish themselves in the coming years. It might not happen tomorrow, might not happen next week, might not happen next year, but Northern Ireland and Scotland could very well be moving in independence directions away from Great Britain because of Brexit. That's my only update about that. Any questions about that? Northern Ireland, Devon, I drink some wine, I still do quizzes. I don't see what the issue. Crazy Brazy says, I don't know what the issue is with drinking wine and doing quizzes. Me either. Yes. King Africa 420 correctly points out we're talking about the Troubles. Look for the Troubles of Northern Ireland, or the Time of Troubles. If anybody knows U2, U2's whole War album is about the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It's been a big deal for a very long time. Meta Eva says, despite the fact that Scotland has had a fewer referendums to leave the UK, do you really see it as a possibility? Yes, I see it as a real possibility given the impact that Brexit is currently having on the United Kingdom. And the pro-independent Scottish political party has been gaining in membership significantly in the last 5 years. I'm reading right now, I think.
Sorry, subscriber.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Subscriber?
Oh, we have a new subscriber. Who's the new subscriber?
Callisto Malfoy.
Callisto Malfoy. Give it back, Malfoy. That's always my Malfoy quote. Give it back, Malfoy. Callisto Malfoy has just become a subscriber. Thank you, Malfoy. And anybody that subscribes, or anybody that subscribed to me in the past, yes, great to see you back as well, Callisto Malfoy. Anybody that subscribes today or subscribed in the past, hit me up on my regular Virginia Tech email, and I'll send you a Plat Avenger head sticker or two. I'm way behind on doing that. This gives me impetus to do this now. Okay?
You have an earlier question.
An earlier question.
It's not tied to anything.
Okay.
Where do you see this Uyghur situation going from little and man?
Oh, I answered the Uyghur question. Yeah. I said that it's going to go downhill for the Uyghurs.
Sorry.
I believe China will continue to flex its muscle. It can't be seen as weak now that it's completing its demolition of democracy in Hong Kong. It will refuse to be seen as weak or even bending on any issue within what it considers its sovereign state territory. And it's doing this, and the Uyghurs will continue to suffer because China's next goal is Taiwan. And Taiwan is going to be the trickiest one of them all for China to reabsorb, because many people think it's a sovereign state already, and many countries like Taiwan, and many countries support Taiwan, and Taiwan has some defensive capabilities, and the United States sells tons of weaponry to Taiwan. Why am I telling you all this about Taiwan? Because China would prefer, this is just an assessment, this isn't fact, but if you look at China's government and how they operate historically, not just in the modern era, China does not like to exhibit weakness. And so my instinct is that China would prefer to crush all Uyghurs in order to save face, because it knows it has a coming fight with Taiwan. It would rather be seen as callous and destructive, yet strong and unbending, because it has a bigger fight coming with Taiwan. That's just my call from the sidelines. I actually did want to, we're already at 420. 420! Where's King Africa? I am going to mention this because this will be a teaser for the next podcast if you so want it. But I was going to have one last update on international organizations from ASEAN. From ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. I've always been a fan of ASEAN too. And it's not really lost too much. It's still a fairly strong organization. It has not taken the same hit that many other organizations have taken as the world moves more right in anti-internationalism and anti-globalism. ASEAN is holding together pretty well and still moving forward on many fronts, both economic and social and political. However, I want you to consider this. Burma just had a coup a month ago. And ASEAN, like many other of these organizations, has a charter that says we all are in it to win it for our citizens, and we support human rights, and we support all of these good things, and all of a sudden, one of its members has gone off the grid. That's not the word. It's gone off campus? No, it's gone off, what's the term? You've gone off the reservation. That's it. I knew I would get it eventually. Myanmar. Burma has gone off reservation, and ASEAN is now suddenly thrust into a position of having to take a stand. So far, So for those of you not following current events at all, on February 1st, yes, 20-some days ago of this year, Myanmar's military had another coup, overthrew the democratically elected government, imprisoned Aung San Suu Kyi, the de facto president, as well as the rest of the top leadership, who have been hidden behind closed doors. No one knows where they're at. Ended a decade of civilian rule. This is not the first time they've done a coup, but it looked like Burma was changing into something that looked like a democracy. But nope, they changed their minds and they slammed the door shut on democracy. There are currently protests happening. The protests have been happening every day. They're accelerating. They're now tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people that are now starting to take bullets and tear gas. That's where Burma's at right now. Back to ASEAN update. This is their first big test. So ASEAN is a fairly new international organization as well, of these 10 Southeast Asian countries with big aspirations. And this is the bloc's first test of what do you do when one of your members does a bad. What do you do? They've not been in this situation. To their credit, Indonesia, along with Malaysia, were the first Asian countries to suggest, hey, we Asian countries should get together and discuss this and maybe sanction Burma, or maybe tell them that we're unhappy. We, your fellow members, are unhappy and you should fix this. However, many other Asian countries are on the fence. And surprise, surprise, including Vietnam, which isn't a pillar of democracy either. I love Vietnam, but they're not a democracy. So Vietnam and a couple other states in ASEAN have said, none of our business. We're just a trade bloc. They can kill their citizens all they want. But I think my prediction is a lot more Asian countries are going to at least start saying, hey, we need to have a meeting about this. We need to have a powwow and figure out if we're going to make a statement about this and if we're going to punish the military junta of Burma and put pressure on them to rejoin the club here. So that's what's intriguing about the ASEAN update to me is they're being tested right now. We'll see the resolution of this, one of the newest international organizations, where so many others have failed in the last 5 years. ASEAN is just now being put to that test. How's that? All that in an hour and a half for a big old flash quiz. If some of you provide me with a bunch of questions, please get me those questions as soon as possible. If you have questions you're writing for me to put on this quiz, would be great. If you could write the question, then give me the actual answer to it, and then 2 or 3 wrong answers. Be sure to tell me what the right answer is, because I'll probably fail the quiz myself. And then send them to me at my VT email. That'd be fantastic, and I'll get that up as soon as I can. But are there other questions as I close up the old mailbag here on this podcast International Organizations update? By the way, I said I was planting a seed about ASEAN. If you would like me to do another podcast just on the situation in Burma, that was a nice intro to it, wasn't it? That's what we call a segue in the business. Any other questions before we wrap up the old World Regions office hour? Actually, MJ Odd says, did you see the lady doing exercises while the military trucks passed her by? Yes. Somebody linked that video. It's hilarious and scary all at the same time. Let's see. SVT Diamondy says Kartini, an Indonesian film, is a pretty good one too. And it's on Netflix. Okay, cool. Somebody email me that, Kartini, so I can remember that. I mean, it rhymes with martini. I should remember it, but that don't mean I will in 5 minutes. Lollery says, is it currently politically correct to say Burma or Myanmar? The country, under its military dictatorship, forcibly changed the name from Burma to Myanmar. Many of us, including myself and former Defense Secretary Colin Powell, I always pointed out, refused to accept that name change out of disrespect for the very anti-democratic military junta. So while it's on the, it's listed at the United Nations as Myanmar, it's in international diplomacy as Myanmar. If they sign a treaty, it's with Myanmar. Because they have done another coup, I am reapplying my disrespect of the military junta by calling it calling the country by its original pre-military dictatorship name of Burma. So I hope it is politically incorrect to call it Burma. That's the point. I don't recognize Myanmar anymore. I recognize the people of Burma. That's what I'll say about that. Let's see. More points. Says Crazy Brazy Lazy. What do you think about Russian protest? Opinions on farmers in India. Thoughts on Alexei Navalny. Holy crap. That's going to be another hour.
Can you do office hours on Sundays?
Yeah, we can do office hours again on... Yeah, we can do regular office hours on like Sunday night if you guys want. And I can talk about what's going on in Russia and India. Yeah, there's protests happening all over the place. It's quite an interesting time. Yep. Okay, let's plan on the regular. Okay, let's plan to do an open office hours on topics of your choice on Sunday. Let's get these flash quizzes up, including the vintage ones and this new one. Vintage ones are already up. Katie says the vintage ones are already up. What'd you put the due date? Next Friday?
No, I didn't know whatever you want. I have it started at 6 o'clock tonight.
Okay. Yeah, so lots to do, and we will have another office hours. It's more open. Maybe 8 p.m. Yeah, I'll send out a notification. Crazy Brazy is already saying, where are they on Moodle? They're just on Moodle. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll do another one of these now that I know that some people want some of these things. If you're in wine class, hold tight. We're going to do a wine happy hour. I think we should do Wednesday wine hour, I guess, from now on. And lots of points coming for everybody. Thank you all for tuning in on a crummy Blacksburg Friday. Hope you have a great weekend. If you need help or have questions about anything else more serious about the course dynamics or anything going on, by all means, hit me up on email. I look at that every now and again. But you all have a fantastic rest of your afternoon, a great weekend, and as always, party on.